Well, I think it likely that there was an indirect communication. This, at least, is indications I've heard via a third party. So, for instance, we don't have direct government-to-government contact with Iran. We don't have diplomatic relations, but Switzerland is our protecting power. So, it would be possible for Iran to communicate as sort of as an escalatory control measure, if you will, to the United States that it intends to conduct attack. I doubt very much that Iran would have motive to state what sort of attack or exactly where, but that something was coming. Now, clearly, Iran is not a military power equivalent to the United States and would probably have had an interest in warning that something is coming, that it will be moderate, or probably they would say proportionate, after their consulate was attacked in Damascus, with the goal of sort of limiting the degree of the United States response. Now, this is a theory that I find plausible, because if you look at what the United States actually did during the attack, it positioned its forces and its naval forces and other forces in the region to intercept missiles coming from Iran and from the Red Sea, but did not conduct a retaliatory attack of its own. The United States did not attack the launchers or sites in Iran. And in fact, if the news reports are to be believed, the Biden administration then communicated to the Israelis that we would not support any further retaliatory attack. So it looks like if the Iranians did this, if they sort of forewarned that we're going to do something, it won't be anything more than what was done to us. And just so you know, I think that was probably motivated by the desire to do exactly what ended up happening, which is to limit the response of the Biden administration. Washington is terribly concerned, and this is on both sides of the aisle. Both the Republicans and the Democrats have reason to be very concerned. On the Democratic side, of course, politically, it's very damaging for any president to preside over a messy, chaotic wartime situation that looks like it's out of control. So obviously, the Biden administration had no control over Hamas to keep them from conducting their attacks on October 7th. And it has had very little, despite professions of support, had very little ability to modulate or sort of scale back the Israeli response. The Biden administration and the Democrats in general wanted this war against Hamas in Gaza. They wanted it done months ago. So the spectacle of a president not only seeing a war burst out by surprise, a very deadly and ugly war on his watch, the inability to curtail it or to shape it is a bad look for Democrats. And frankly, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, very unhappy that there hasn't been more done to provide humanitarian assistance or secure a ceasefire to protect Palestinian civilians. On the right side of the aisle, on the Republican side, it looks like very ineffectual support to Israel. And this is a war in which, while people in many countries, perhaps even India, but certainly in much of the Middle East, people think the United States has essentially been uncritical and given a full blank check, so to speak, to Israel during this war, unconditional support. But in fact, by American standards, during which since the last 40, 50 years, we have provided massive amounts of political support, diplomatic support, military and logistical support to Israel every time it's been in a conflict. This has been a more conditional and more critical approach than is normal in over those last 40 or 50 years. So I think that many Republicans feel like the war has strained the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem in ways that hasn't happened before. So everybody's concerned. I think in terms of concern that the Biden administration expressed early on that this could metastasize and become some sort of a broader regional conflict, it sort of is in a way. I mean, there's fighting in the Red Sea, there's the Houthi attacks, there's low-level fighting going on between sort of Hezbollah firing rockets out of southern Lebanon. Could it get bigger than that? It certainly could, and I think that's a concern. But in general, it's politically damaging, it's strategically damaging, and Washington is not happy that this is continuing to drag on the way it is. Yes, I think it can be ironclad in the defensive sense and conditional in the offensive sense. Now, again, I'm probably closer to the conservative position in the U.S. on this, which is that it's weakness against Iran that led to this conflict to begin with, because the Biden administration keeps signaling, here's what we won't do. Essentially, they're like they told Moscow with regards to Ukraine, they're telling Tehran with regards to this regional conflict in the Middle East. We won't attack you in your own territory. We won't support Israel to do X or Y. Now, whether one thinks Israel is right or wrong in the conflict, and obviously there's people on different positions globally on this. Anybody who studies geopolitics and history knows that when you're in a conflict situation and you signal to an adversary the limits of how far you will escalate, and you clearly state that while my capabilities may be at a 10, I will never escalate beyond a 5 or a 6, you're guaranteeing that the other side knows exactly what their risk factor is. So I think it's a mistake. I understand the thinking here from the Biden administration. They're thinking that they are de-escalating by showing Iran exactly how far, what the line is they can go up to. But in reality, what they're doing is they're giving Iran sort of a free hand up to that point. Now, I believe the administration when they say ironclad with regards to defense of Israel proper against missile and rocket attacks and so forth. But that ironclad does not extend to strikes against Iran in Iran, and probably not regionally either. I think if Israel is going to attack, say, for instance, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members in Syria or in Lebanon, which they do frequently, the United States will have no part of that because they, again, in the formulation of the Biden administration, consider that escalatory behavior. Yes, he's fed up with him, and he's been fed up with him for probably a decade. So, I mean, it's worse now. But there's a structural relationship between the United States and Israel that means no matter how frosty the relations between the two leaders, there's still certain things that every American president will do and that no American president would do. No American president will actually jump on the other side and start to put sanctions on Israel and cut off military. That just won't happen, no matter how much the animosity grows between the two men. And this is a relationship rooted in animosity. I believe they have very different political philosophies and personality styles, and they are very much on opposite sides with regards to the current conflict. So yes, he's fed up with them, but there's just, again, a special place, a special relationship for Israel and the United States, and there's certain things that are limits on what the president can do or will do. I think we're kind of at that limit, right? So when we see that the United States abstains from Security Council resolutions condemning Israel or calling for a ceasefire, which happened at the end of the Obama second term and has happened again now under President Biden, that's a really strong indicator that the men at the top do not have a positive relationship. I think it's going to hurt Biden, clearly, because it's possible now to look at the course of events in multiple places since he took office in January 2021 and see a record that is filled with failures and defeats and chaos. So this includes war in Ukraine, which in some sense was going on before February 2022, but escalated greatly. And as we were talking earlier about escalation dynamics, it's very easy to argue from the Republican side that President Biden signaled weakness to Vladimir Putin and made clear what we would not do to help support Ukraine and the types of aid we would not give and so forth. So you can point to that, and then now you point to the issue with Iran and Israel, and this is all over the press over the last couple of days in the United States too, about whose fault is it that Iran feels emboldened to make, for the first time in its history, a direct attack on Israel, not just by proxy. So it looks like weakness. It looks like for all of the accusations that the Obama and Biden teams put against Trump for coddling dictators, it looks like, so his backslapping with Xi or with different authoritarian leaders or quasi-authoritarian leaders saying nice things about Kim Jong-un, what have you. This led to accusations that he was buddying up to dictators. But the counter accusation, I think, is more powerful and more empirically sound. The Biden administration has actually failed to deter dictators and authoritarians, and that includes Putin in Ukraine and certainly now Iran with regards to the war in Gaza. So I think the longer this drags on, it hurts Biden and his campaign from two angles, from this critique I've just laid out from the right, that he's soft on regional rivals and therefore encourages sort of aggressive behavior. And on the left, by the fact that he can't even stop the war so that the Palestinian people, some of whom are reportedly on the edge of starvation, have a decent, basic humanitarian uh, set of conditions to live their lives in. So there is no winning this unless that war stops for the Biden administration, and there's no indication the war is going to stop. You can look beyond that and look at oil prices, the inability to get the Saudis to cut production, and sort of waning U.S. influence in the Middle East. Some things that have gone well for, like with any administration, nobody's entirely disastrous or entirely successful in foreign policy. It's always a mixed bag. But there's two or three really bad conflicts that broke out on his watch, and we'll throw Afghanistan in there, that ended on his watch, but in a way very prejudicial to U.S. interests. That it's going to be very hard for that team to make the argument in the election campaign that they've had success.